Good morning. Welcome back to Smart Growth America's Equity Summit. I want to give a special shout out to our folks on the West Coast, including Vignesh, who are up just a little bit early. And thank you all for joining us for the second day of our 3-day virtual Equity Summit. My name is Calvin Gladney, and I am blessed to be President and CEO of Smart Growth America. We are excited to continue discussions that we started yesterday with an exciting group of experts, practitioners, and policymakers to discuss how we center advancing racial equity in our smart growth work. Today, we're going to pivot to a conversation about transportation. But first, before we get into our program, I wanted to briefly just thank our sponsors for their support in making this event possible. This 3-day virtual summit was made possible by Citi, our event sponsor. And Citi's Action for Racial Equity represents an unprecedented effort to leverage Citi's core business capabilities and Citi Foundation philanthropy to help address racial equity and justice in the US. So we really thank Citi for its support. Also wanted to quickly thank our presenting sponsors, starting with Citi Health. Citi Health is an initiative of the De Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente, and they're proud to support SGA's Equity Summit. Citi Health works to advance policies at the local level that ensure that all people have access to healthy choices. If you want to learn more about how cities can use policy to reduce or remove systemic barriers to health, you can go to citihealth.org. Also wanted to thank our presenting sponsor, NeighborWorks America. NeighborWorks provided support as a presenting sponsor for this summit, and for more than 40 years, NeighborWorks America has strived to make every community a place of opportunity. NeighborWorks provides professional development and training to housing and community development organizations nationwide, and they're a good partner along with Citi Health to our staff on a variety of projects. And then finally, wanted to go to our closed captioning sponsor, AARP. And as you can see, our ASL interpreters are there, and that's one of the benefits of our AARP sponsorship, so that we can walk the walk in terms of equity. AARP's Livable Communities Hub, you can find it at aarp.org/livable, and you can sign up for their newsletter, or by texting LIVABLE to 50757. With that, thanking the sponsors, again, I wanted to say welcome and hello. And now I'm pleased to introduce Beth Osborne, our Vice President of Transportation and the Director of our Transportation for America program.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Calvin. First, before we get started today, just a few housekeeping reminders. I want to note first that if you are viewing this session as a live stream from the lobby of our summit, we encourage you to join us in the session itself. You would do so by clicking on the session titled Day 2, Transportation and Thriving Communities, toward the bottom of the lobby. In addition to our ASL interpreters, there is closed captioning provided through the Zoom. To access the closed captioning, click the button in the controls for live transcript. They can be viewed either as subtitles on the screen or in a separate window or sidebar. These sessions will be recorded and will be available online after the event at smartgrowthamerica.org. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive credits from the American Planning Association. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org. Log into your account and search for the name of today's event, which is Smart Growth America's Equity Summit. You can also use the direct link provided in the chat. We also hope you will continue to share your thoughts on social media throughout the day. We would love to hear what is resonating with you as the day unfolds. You can tag us at Smart Growth USA, and use the hashtag Smart Growth Equity. For those of you who were not able to join our first session yesterday, we had a great series of speakers and discussions focused on land use and development. We started the day with Majora Carter, a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, and currently senior program director for Community Regeneration at Groundswell, Inc., who discussed strategies for equitable development and neighborhood investment, including the role of retail and third spaces as community hubs during the pandemic. Her discussion of investment went deeper than money and development to cover the social aspect of community. And she talked about the value in the community itself, saying, while looking to revitalizations, we must also remember that there is beauty and talent there that must be retained. We moved from that inspirational keynote into a presentation by Dr. Marshall Shepard, a leading climate expert from the University of Georgia, fresh off of their win over Alabama. Thank you, dogs, from an LSU Tiger, who widened the lens to discuss the climate gap, or how climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color and low-income communities, so often because of past inequities in development and housing policies. He also pointed out how land use is a key component in strategies to reduce emissions and the impacts of climate change. We finished the day with a great panel led by Camille Manning-Broom, a member of our board and the head of the Center for Planning Excellence located in my home state of Louisiana. She moderated a discussion with Zelalem Adafris, the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Catalyst Miami, Gary Giroux, LA County's first Chief Sustainability Officer, and Shirai Lewis-Gruss, the Director of Data Enablement at First Street Foundation. And they discussed how the information from climate experts can support community-based organizations and local regional governments who are seeking to respond to the inequitable impacts of climate change, including through community organizing, data access, and climate vulnerability planning. If you missed it, as I mentioned earlier, these sessions are being recorded and will be available at our website. I strongly encourage you to watch it. In fact, even if you saw it, it's worth watching again. I expect that I will. Today, we'll be moving to a conversation about transportation, but not just about transportation, about technology and transportation. We will explore how technology can and cannot improve equitable outcomes in transportation. I will tell you up front that I approach the issue of technology with some skepticism. Everything I've seen in transportation shows me that our problems are caused by policy and not by technology. So I resist the idea that technology itself is the solution. The folks we're going to hear from today will help us explore how to use technology well and what its limitations are. Before we jump in, we want to kick off the day with a series of polls. Since we know we have some different participants today, we'd like to start with some of the same questions we began yesterday to get to know you first. Now, these interactive polls will allow us to see the results in real time, and they should hopefully work much more smoothly than they did yesterday morning since we have a little more experience with them. We will be putting the URL in the chat, and you can see it here on the screen. Just go ahead and click on that or type the URL into your phone or a new window on your computer and answer the poll questions there. There's also an option for texting to the number on the screen and in the chat. Once you have it open, just keep it there and we will return to it for more poll questions. First, tell us where you live. Click anywhere on the map to drop a pin in that location and we'll see those pins populate the map in real time. You are not looking to click on the name of a state. You're just looking to click on a spot to put a pin on the map to show us where you are. For our participants located outside the US, just drop the pin in the direction of your home. And DC residents, look for that Maryland, Virginia line for your pin. Now, this is the only poll question where you can't text. You have to use the URL. We're going to leave this open for 30 seconds or so to give you a chance to respond. And you can respond using either of the options on the screen by texting or going to the URL instead. I love seeing it populate. It's really fun to see where everyone comes from. All right. We're going to move on to question 2. We want to hear again how you would rank your expertise in or comfort level with advancing racial equity through your work. Click the number that best describes your level of expertise or comfort with addressing racial inequity in your work, from someone with no real experience or comfort at 1 up to a total expert at 5. Where would you rank yourself? We'll again leave the poll open for 30 seconds or so before we close out the question and show you the results. I have not seen the question open up to me in the poll. I don't know if others, there we go. So just click 1 if your experience or comfort level is low, and 5 if you think you are a great expert. I see people are filling it in pretty well. I think we've kind of steadied out here. All right. Looks like we have a lot of people who are here and eager and ready to learn about how to be a bigger part of the equity conversation. And our last poll question for now is, what brought you to the summit? Why are you here? Choose the question or the answer that best describes what brought you to the summit today. Are you here primarily because you want to hear interesting people have thoughtful discussions about equity? You want that you follow the work of one of the speakers? Maybe you want to learn how to change your own professional and personal practices. You want to engage with challenging ideas. And it looked interesting, but you're still on the fence. You're not sure why you're here yet. We'll hope to help you answer those questions. All right. Wonderful. Well, we are going to move into our conversation on transportation now. Today, we're going to have a keynote presentation followed by a panel discussion with a great group of experts. I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers, starting with our keynote speaker, Vignesh Swaminathan, CEO and president of Crossroad Lab, known to many by his TikTok handle, Mr. Barricade. Vignesh is principal in charge and project manager at Crossroad Lab and has over 10 years of municipal and transportation engineering experience. He has worked with municipalities, resource agencies, and Caltrans, the state DOT, to plan, design, and deliver much needed bridge, roadway, and infrastructure improvements throughout California. He is the president of the firm and specializes in all aspects of transportation projects, ranging from transportation studies to construction documents. He has formed a reputation in the industry for developing complex intersection geometrics to solve difficult transportation challenges. Vignesh's career focuses on designing transportation projects such as bike paths, protected intersections, bridges, corridors, and interchanges. He maintains a thorough understanding of the transportation project delivery process, planning, and capital improvement. I learned about Vignesh on TikTok after my daughter encouraged me to try it out. After I got past the silly cat videos, which I still love, the algorithm quickly shifted me into transportation and urbanism. And Mr. Barricade was one of the first I was introduced to. I was sucked in not just by the great explanations of transportation design and its impacts, but also by his dancing to hip hop all over the Bay Area. Just the kind of fun a person can use during a pandemic. We are going to follow him with a panel discussion moderated by Dr. Regan Patterson, Transportation Equity Fellow at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, who will be joined by panelists including Kim Lucas, Acting Director of Pittsburgh Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, Tiffany Chu, Senior Vice President at VIA and the CEO and founder of Remix, and Bob Dean, the CEO of the Center for Neighborhood Technology. Now, before I turn things over to Vignesh, we wanted to ask just a few more specific poll questions about transportation to tee up this discussion. So the first poll question is a bit of free association. In one response with no punctuation, enter as many words or phrases as you like, describing the biggest transportation needs we face in the country. Note that you can respond only once and you don't need punctuation. As you respond, we're going to see a nifty word cloud with some major themes start to materialize on the screen. And this is going to be back in that URL that you use to answer poll questions. Oh, wow. We're going to give it about 5 more seconds before we lock the poll. So get your thoughts in as quickly as possible. All right, there we go. Wow. That's incredible. Thank you. We are also going to have you answer a question. How would you quickly characterize the current state of transportation investment in the U.S.? Now, this is a multiple choice question. So just click on the answer that most closely aligns with your feelings about transportation investment in the U.S. We have a crowd that is dissatisfied. I think you will enjoy our conversation about how to make it better. About 10 more seconds. All right, the third question. How do you think technology advancements will impact transportation equity? Here we go. You've got 4 options. And we'll leave this open for, again, another 20 seconds or so to give people a chance to answer. That people have rather decisively chosen option B, it looks like here. Got 10 more seconds. All right, and the last question before I turn things over to Vignesh. In the transportation system, what technological innovations are most needed to promote equitable outcomes? Now, obviously, we have not provided every possible technological answer here, so choose which you like most out of the option. All right, we're going to leave this open for another 10 seconds, and then we're going to dive right in with Mr. Barricade. All right, thank you all so much for participating. I am, like I said, going to hand things over to Vignesh. I'm going to let him present, and then we'll all have a chance to ask him some questions. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Beth, for the kind words and the introduction here. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you all for having me. I have a few slides to talk about my experiences using the internet and using technology, and also how we've grown over the last few years. Many of you may have known me through my work with NACTO, which we did a lot of work with NACTO on both the design guidelines and also implementation with them. I've been involved in the active transportation space for a little over 10 years now, and mainly centered around bike, ped, transit, grading and drainage, and utility relocation. I'm here today to talk to you about how I've seen a community outreach and technology change over the last few years, from how we used to do community meetings to doing pop-up quick build, and how I'm using social media today. Next slide. So my name is Vignesh Swaminathan. I was a programmer in high school and early college, and I had developed a parking app. And I was approaching different cities with this parking app, trying to incorporate technology and transportation. And as I approached the city of San Jose, I quickly realized they don't have any data, and they were kind of desperate for data. And then I got a job there as a transportation intern, a civil engineering intern in the parking and downtown operations group. There, I managed parking garages, on-street parking, and eventually I did marathons, festivals, and concerts, and where I shut down the street with cones and barricades and traffic control devices for any kind of turkey trot marathon, Santa run, when Obama came from his hotel to the airport, and that was my role, and that's where I got the name Mr. Barricade, because I was the one you would coordinate with to shut down a street with cones and barricades. Later through that job, I worked on some of the first bike infrastructure in downtown San Jose, where we took away a lane and put in a bike lane. And then I was inspired and went to go work for a highway consulting firm, designing freeway interchanges, roadway grading and drainage for large freeway interchanges, right-of-way take, widening, and worked on a lot of the ills of highway design. There, I quickly learned and saw inequitable practices with our community outreach, how our community outreach was only done at 3 p.m. and in English. I worked on a lot of right-of-way take for freeway interchanges, where most of the last names of the right-of-way parcels were Latine last names, and where we had very few Latine participants in our community outreach meetings. And so as a civil engineer, I started, my stomach started to grumble about some of the ills of outreach and how we do our work. And then that kind of inspired me to venture into starting my own firm and getting more into outreach and urban planning. I also sit as a few commission and committee roles. I'm the chair of the Cupertino Sustainability Commission, and I'm also the chair of Valley Transportation Agencies, VTA, our congestion management and transit agencies here, their advisory committee and watchdog committee. And I also run a few social media channels as Mr. Barricade. If you want to see all of my engineering specific videos, you can check them out on my LinkedIn page. Next slide. So when I try to explain equity to folks, it becomes it's such a broad term. And one of the things that I like to talk about on my TikTok is drainage and water. We're all water-based, and we've been messing with water on this blue planet for many, many, many years. And this is also being used to both provide services and clean water to people, but also to marginalize different communities. From the Indus Valley civilization, which is one of the first civilizations when our species went from hunter-gatherers to actually setting up civilization. And that's one of the first times that we had clean water coming in and dirty water coming out. And the top images on the top left is there's clean water coming in and there's sewer going out. Over the many years, we've seen many different empires come, such as the Roman Empire, which has marginalized different communities and manipulated water with aqueducts. And then on the bottom right is where my family's from, in Tamil Nadu, where there's been a lot of working with the drainage system to build out the civilization there. Next slide. This same story is being reflected in America from when we had many native populations that lived amongst the rivers and would move and meander when the rivers would move and meander, to our country becoming more of an agricultural layout, a suburban layout, where we have manipulated water and drainage to actually be used in ways that were not so natural, by building berms and canals and more. Through agriculture. And roadway improvements also manipulate drainage. On the top right here, you'll see a typical cross-section of the roadway without any curb and gutter. And a lot of that was done because drunk driving only became illegal after we had roads for many, many years. And so for many years, we allowed for accommodation of distracted driving through a clear zone, or which is a kind of a ditch that vehicles can end up in. And we have not implemented good drainage practices and/or roadway safety practices for many, many, many years. Even though we've had that in our standards. On the bottom on the middle images is a standard detail, public works standard details from the 1860s that had curb and gutter and a lot of the same infrastructure improvements that we're still lacking in our cities today. But this public works standard details was what existed in this country before slavery was abolished. So you can kind of see how the technology of curb and gutter is still coming into many cities. And then what many of us talk about and have been dealing with over the last few years is the effects of highway expansion as it's gone through our urban areas, and also manipulated drainage. And so some of the things I do in my TikTok is I explain to the community kind of this history of drainage and how we mess with drainage over the years to build out our environment and build out our infrastructure. Next slide. This has led to a lot of best practices that we try to follow, where we try to do clean the water through bioswales. We try to incorporate trails along our riverbanks. We plan for pollinating plants to allow for bees to be able to move from the mountains to the bay, and also for foxes and other rodents to move from the mountains to the bay along our creek channels. And we've also learned a lot about flood zones and other types of impacts. On the top middle image is an image that I think is very important, is an image of an area in the peninsula of the Bay Area. The greener tree area is a city called Atherton, which is the most affluent zip code in America. Each home is multi-million-dollar compounds. And then there's a lot of street trees and good design, and that's why you see a little bit greener on the left side of that aerial. On the right side of that aerial is East Palo Alto, which was murder capital of the country in the 1990s. And what you see around there is that it's surrounded by a flood zone. And that's because East Palo Alto was historically a redlined African-American thriving community that was always feeling the effects of sea level rise and flooding. But there's only one freeway interchange between the two. And we've learned a lot about the different equities of how drainage has been used to manipulate it to go into minority and low income communities by folks who have built their compounds, building them on good land, which they know is going to be lasting for hundreds of years. And other communities not knowing the effects of sea level rise or other types of environmental impacts. And now we're looking into retreating or reinforcing that coastline, but that's just because the community there was not aware of the impacts. And on the top right here, you'll see some of the best practices of cycle tracks, bioswales, and more. These are some of the best practices of our time, and we try to implement that kind of stuff. And what I do with my TikTok is I talk about best practices in intersection design, and I also talk about drainage and the history of drainage. Next slide. So some of the things that I've done is I've tried to make infrastructure cool or popular. Different ways of me doing that is I may respond to different videos that have infrastructure in the background, which is many videos. There may be like a fight or some people dancing in the street or a car crash or some kind of parade. And I will make videos where in TikTok, I'll cut the video, or as they call it, stitch, and then I'll explain what the infrastructure was in the background of that video. Other things that I've done is I've also memified infrastructure by using different hip hop songs where rappers may talk about the trenches or where folks may talk about different neighborhoods, and I've used that to kind of memify infrastructure. And another thing that I've done is I've talked about drainage. There's a Swedish trap rap group called Drain Gang, and I've used many of their audios to kind of talk about drainage. And so that's some of the ways that what I've done with Drain Gang is I will go to different parts of our drainage infrastructure, and I will use their different audios to show off the infrastructure, and I will use different hashtags like you see here. So a weir or a low head dam is used to change the energy of water. Here it's going from concrete to natural. And if we can play the video.
What are you doing in the drain, idiot? Drain gang!
And so when people see this video, it adds a shock value. There's like, why is there a man in a suit in a drain dancing? How does he know about this kind of music? Wait, did I just Did I just learn something from the hashtags? What happens if I click on hashtag Weir or Low Head Dam? And so I've memeified infrastructure and made it popular in many different ways. And now I have many, many videos that get sent to me on a daily basis of people going and doing my specific dances in infrastructure or on in bike lanes or in drainage, and people doing my dances in drains or around drains, asking me what the different drains are. I've also made up many different dances on TikTok with a little over 20 dances that have gone viral. And I have over 1.2 billion views on TikTok, where people have either seen me from my dances or from my infrastructure. Next slide. The next things that I talk about is changes to our infrastructure and design, specifically intersection design, which is my expertise. So not only do I talk about the equity issues with redlining and drainage, but I also talk about the next generation of our infrastructure. And one of the main things that I explain is kind of the issues of the system that we have today. For instance, one of the big things I talk about is protected bike lanes and the dangers of weaving bike lanes. We expect cyclists and cars to weave as they approach intersection, as they get to intersection approaches. But we all know the car differential is cars going 15, 20 miles an hour around a turn, and a bike can go 0 to 5, 10 miles an hour max. And that speed differential can and will be fatal. And so it's crazy that we expect cyclists and vehicles to weave at every single right turn just for bicycles to go through. This is something that we have done in highway design, and we already know how uncomfortable it is to weave when we have to do it on a highway. So it's kind of wild that we expect that for bikes. Next slide. I go into some of the best practices of our design, showing different details, showing how green boxes work, two-stage turn boxes, how different types of paint is used for, so people can learn about the different standards. I'm blessed to have started my career and being from the Bay Area, which is being very progressive in its bike infrastructure improvements over the many years because of our good climate. And so being able to showcase a lot of our cool work is something that is a big part of my social media. Next slide. And I know that protected intersections are here and they're coming. I personally have worked on many different protected intersections over the my years of my career, and I've also helped write the book, Don't Give Up at the Intersection with NACTO. I recommend you go check out that book. It's free. You'll see my name and license and company on the inside cover of the book because we did a lot of the diagrams and helped review and provide input on that document. But for many people in the country, they don't even know what a protected intersection is. They don't even know what a bike lane is. They've never even seen that. And so this is when it does come into their community, there will be a huge shock value. So letting them to become comfortable with it on the internet, or at least seeing it implemented first, it slowly will become normalized. And by me showing how it's normally used here in California, it helps normalize it across the country. And now people all over the country are begging for this kind of infrastructure because of what they've seen through the internet and through my social media. This also helps us as professionals also see this kind of stuff. Many of us have heard what a protected intersection is. We've also seen what design guidelines is. We've seen pretty documents that look very picturesque like this many times, but to actually see pictures, video that makes you feel the infrastructure is a huge difference for not only professionals, but also for the community at large. Next slide. Us as professionals, we're fairly limited in our standards, even though you saw this next slide. Even though you see this pretty protected intersection diagram, that's something that's being interpreted. We as professionals don't have a lot of standards to stand on yet, nationally or even statewide. The middle image is what we have in Caltrans of what to do protected bike lanes. It's just an image. It looks like it was made in Microsoft Word. Otherwise, we have the highway design manual and the separated bike lane guide, but they don't really have any information about protected intersections. Massachusetts put out this separated bikeway guide, but it is very, very, it shows a lot of heavy civil work when we're still trying to work towards quick build. And so we help develop our own guide. Next slide. And that's a Don't Give Up at the Intersection guidance that I talked about earlier that involves a lot of the history from my career of learning and messing with these type of intersections using paint, plastic, pilot projects, and more. Next slide. So all the best practices of me messing with this kind of infrastructure, trying different things have been put into this design document that was released a few years back. And you can see some of these practices here, where we put in 2 radius here, one for larger vehicles and one for passenger vehicles. And so a passenger vehicle, if they're going fast and they cut the corner, they'll feel these little bumps as they turn. And this document was called "Don't Give Up at the Intersection," because many engineers want to wait till we have curbs or signals or a lot of heavy costly improvements, but we can implement a lot with paint and plastic, and that's what this document, my TikTok, is here to showcase that. Next slide. And some of the things that one of the big things that I talk about in my on social media is that, hey, it's not scary government coming doing scary things in your neighborhood. We're trying to learn, and we're being humble. And so we do a lot of these pilot projects, demonstration projects, so we can receive input before we finally go do the permanent installation. I've been hired to to make videos for city projects, other people's projects, and also my own projects here, to kind of show the process and help provide input. And this is all a great, this is all in line with how we want to provide more equitable outreach. Instead of something suddenly popping up in your neighborhood that nobody really knows about, the community, low-income communities, minority communities, undocumented communities, different language communities can come provide input, and maybe even get some of their design changes or even art or languages in the street through these pilot projects before we go implement these final projects. And I've made a lot of videos to showcase that. Next slide. Here's a short video showcasing one of my most symmetrical protected intersection in San Jose. Next slide. Oh, show the video.
Hey all, Mr. Barricade here to show you a fully protected intersection with all 4 corners protected in San Jose, California. This is Almaden Road and San Fernando right here, and it was designed by yours truly. Let's check it out. The vehicle stop bar is placed right here. That's a good 20 to 30 feet from where the bicycles wait in this forward bicycle box. And so when a bike approaches the intersection, they come wait at this bike box while the vehicles are waiting back here. And when a green light goes, the bike gets a head start in front of the vehicle. To reduce the risk of any sort of crash on a green phase, we put a very tight radius here, so a vehicle is forced to slow down when making this turn, and they view the bike at a better angle and not in their blind spot. And so when a bicycle wants to make a left turn, they cross on a green phase, and they come right to this box, and they wait here for the next phase, which comes right after. This helps inexperienced cyclists, people in scooters, and folks in mobility scooters. So come check it out in San Jose, California.
So how much better was that video than my previous slides? A lot. It was able to show you a point of view, showing you how the user looks at the intersection. Showing a plan view diagram to the community is confusing. A lot of times we're spending so much time just trying to explain how the engineering diagram is supposed to represent, instead of actually going and showing people the infrastructure. And during the pandemic, I was not able to do my pilot projects where I was bringing people in to come look at the work. We were all forced to be at home. So doing these kind of videos from point of view, where I have my phone and I'm walking around and showing you how you as a user uses the video. But that is a really, really great and much more connected way of showing people this infrastructure. This project, next slide. This project was part of a project that we did with the Knight Foundation, where we implemented 16 miles of roadway and 58 protected corners in the dense downtown San Jose. This involved over 6 miles of protected bike lanes in dense downtown San Jose. And that project has a proven success record of improving cycling by over 250%, cycling and scooters, and also a major reduction in crashes and no fatalities on the entire network. By doing these projects with paint and plastic, by bringing in the local community to these different pilot projects, by showing them on social media, it normalizes it to the fact that we can actually build these for real. And Fremont has been doing that. Next slide. Here's a fully built out, raised, protected intersection in Fremont with second decimal elevations. And we are implementing a lot of these here in the Bay Area. I'm working on 16 of them right now. Where they're fully raised, they're curbed, and this is only because of our social media. This is only because of our pilot projects, is why we're able to get the community to be okay with this type of infrastructure. Next slide. One of the big things that I do with my work, well, you can't see the text here, but one of the big things that I do with my work is I try to make these the complex engineering terminology a lot simpler. Instead of using the words plan, specs, and estimate, I might change it. It's not showing up here, but to exhibit memo cost. Instead of calling it a plans, we make it call an exhibit. Instead of making specs, which tells you all the materials, we call it a memo, and it makes it a little bit less scary for the community to understand what we're talking about, and so they feel less, for lack of better words, dumb. We don't want the community to feel that way. We want them to feel to be, because a lot of times the community is smarter than we are as designers, because they know about their infrastructure, and we need to help pull that information from them so we can actually implement great projects. Next slide. So instead of it being community leaders add their input to city staff to create signature projects, I try to encourage the city staff to enable the community leaders by education, training, social media, and even funding for community-based organizations to actually have ongoing project delivery. And this is what we need when we implement a lot of active transportation infrastructure, because these are smaller, more impactful projects that affect a lot of the community, and we need to have ongoing project delivery. Next slide. And this is proven here in the Bay Area to have a lot of great projects that have really been centered around businesses and scooters and bike lanes, and incorporating a lot of cultural art and other amenities for the community. And next slide. And it takes organization through social media to do great solutions. On the top left here is an example of an ex-mayor who organized with their community on Nextdoor to donate the land in their backyard, the back of their backyard, to a trail. And they donated all the land to the back of the backyard to him, or he purchased it. And then he, through his organization on Nextdoor, he was able to force the city to build the actual trail. On the top right, you'll see a Paint a Town Oakland, where Oakland, through with community-based organizations, was able to organize to put artwork in the street. In the bottom, you'll see how the PTA was able to work together through social media to organize to get crosswalks near the school. So we're already on our phones, we're already on social media, we're already talking about this kind of stuff. The information just needs to get to the people, or they need to know where to go, where to move with that information. Next slide. Here's another project that we did in Emeryville, California, where I have to really plan out what I say in my videos to reach all the different types of audiences that we want to reach. You can play the video.
Mr. Barricade here to show how we took away a lane and added an on-street trail in a residential neighborhood on Doyle Street in Emeryville, California, designed by yours truly. Let's check it out. We reduced the traffic by introducing traffic diversion so cars do not get on the street anymore. And it's only bicycle pedestrian. This block has 2 parks on both sides, so it made a lot of sense. We made the road into a one-way street, and we added these plastic posts and trash cans to help define the space. We tested this out with temporary barricades for about 2 months and gained feedback about parking loss and traffic diversion before we implemented this. And we also designed it that bicycles don't have to stop, but vehicles do. So come check it out in Emeryville, California.
So these short videos kind of address the process, the design, the constraints, the objectives, what the NIMBYs might be against, what the community may not know about. And it's to fit all that in 45 seconds is not easy, but it takes a lot of practice. And this has been what I've able to use social media to help me practice how I explain these kind of things. Next slide. This is a great project as part of their on-call, and we implemented a lot of cycle tracks, bike lanes, shared streets, and diversion throughout the city of Emeryville. And Emeryville is a very progressive city and has done a lot of very progressive planning for their community. Emeryville is very, very dense, walkable area. The only city in the Bay Area that has had an increase in the African-American population by them building a lot of housing and diversity and jobs. And I think it's a very, very well well planned, and it should be a model city for a lot of other cities. Next slide. And so one of the things that I do is I do more than just infrastructure talks. I do dances, I follow trends, I may show off my culture and my own music choice. I show off a lot of different hip hop and art, EDM and other types of music that I listen to. And the reason I do that is to normalize this kind of stuff. So it's not just scary government or scary urban planners coming in and coming and doing something in your neighborhood, or people that aren't like you, that don't think like you, doing stuff in your neighborhood. I'm very connected to people. I connect with people on my music, about what I like about cars, about what I like about bikes, about what I like about transit, what I like about all kinds of food and more. And by me connecting with folks on a human level, it makes it be a lot less scary for folks. I've also done and made a lot of viral dances to different types of music, over 20 viral dances. I get every hour, I get about maybe 3 to 10 duets where people are duetting back my videos, either asking about infrastructure, either sending me back the videos for me to comment on, or doing my dances that they do. I have a lot of people that do my dances in my actual bike lanes. I was trying to find one to show in this slide, but it gets lost in the feed. But people go out to my bike lanes and do my dances in the bike lane there, and so it's become a really big community. And you look forward to doing a lot more, showcasing different types of projects, long form video on YouTube, and just to enable the community. The reason I do all this is because I want it to not just be a reference book that's on a shelf that's collecting dust. I want this to be in everybody's feed. The reason is because we need to enable a lot of our community. When I've done community outreach in my affluent neighborhoods, I have everybody come in and the room is crowded. Every landlord, the whole block is there. And when I go to my not so affluent, my minority communities, barely anybody shows up. And a lot of times it's because they don't think it affects them. They don't know. What to even ask for. And so we have to be able to enable them. And so what the main purpose of my presence on the internet is to normalize and teach people, so that when there is time to provide community input, they know what to ask for, or at least they can have the conversation. Because we spend a lot of times teaching folks to even be able to have that conversation through our equitable outreach. And what I'm trying to do with social media is to help bridge that gap. And here's one of my dances that I did in the bike lane.
Bro, get up close and let the Glock 22. We pop out at your party. I'm with the gang, and this gonna be a robbery. So tuck your chain.
So I've done this dance probably about 20 or 30 times on TikTok, and that dance probably has around maybe around 20 million views of me doing that, and on all the different in social media. We have things we're reaching to, and when I make my videos, in my 45-second videos, I'm trying to plan for the responses and the comments and the haters and the trolls from all these different groups. We have our NIMBYs that are just be against the different projects no matter what happens. We have and I try to make sure that I plan in my video for what they may be against. We have our single disciplinary advocates, where those are purely your bicycle advocates, or your climate action advocates, or other types of advocates that are only focused on one discipline. When roadway and infrastructure and equity is a very multidisciplinary issue. We also have a lot of people who are interested and concerned. They just want to know what direction, where to go, who to talk to, so they can advocate for their community. They may already know about understand equity. They may understand some things about different communities. They just want to do what's right. And you also have a lot of marginalized groups that are just not part of the conversation. They may be too busy. They may be working. They may have language barriers. They may be undocumented. They may not feel that they have the ability to speak on something because they're a renter. And so what I try to do with my videos is I try to address all 4 of these groups in that 45 seconds. And so that way I'm ready for whatever they would come up in the comments in that 45 seconds. Because in these short form videos, it's not only about what you say in that 45 seconds, but it's also a lot of times about what you don't say. And so that's something I've learned through my time on TikTok. I've gone through many different cycles of where I was dealing with a lot of hate, a lot of weird racial hate that I was not used to as growing up in the Bay Area in a very diverse community. Once I had my account taken down because of a lot of the hate I was receiving from both people against things in transportation and also just weird internet trolls. And that's helped me grow and learn how to communicate and how to address things on the internet. And with that, I'll take any questions and we'll go to Q&A.
That sounds great. I have a couple of questions before I dig into audience questions. And of course, as I expected, we have way too many audience questions to cover them all. We could keep you here all day with the questions coming in. So I'm going to just start by something that occurred to me to ask beforehand, but then I've seen seconded throughout the chat and the Q&A, which is these projects seem low cost and exciting and helpful to engage folks in the potential for more permanent change. Why do you think it's not more common?
It's not more common because it's very, very new. Local cities have very, what you would call ancestral knowledge, where their engineer or planner has been learning from somebody who's been there for 40, 50 years and has only done something in a certain way, who was learning from somebody else from 40, 50 years who's only done something a certain way. And there isn't a lot of cross-pollination in our industry, except for summits like this, conferences, and other times when people can actually go to different cities and observe. I think also a lot of engineers, they just like to follow the book blindly without actually doing much actual engineering and design. The way these paint and posts, in my opinion, are a lot safer than a lot of other just curbs in general, because a lot of times when we put in new curbs, we have to put up a reflective post on top of the curb anyway. And so, and that's because the reflective post meets the temporary traffic control standards for a reflective post. And so what I've basically done is as using my experience doing temporary traffic control and also my experience doing highway design, I've developed this quick build practice of meeting or going above and beyond what we would do for temporary traffic control and meeting all my engineering standards. I think one of the main reasons we don't do this right now is it just hasn't been communicated well yet up until now. Engineers need to be communicated at their level. And so when I draw these plans, I may not talk to the engineers about it being a bikeway project. I talk about it being a roadway safety project. I might even draw my engineering plans in the city's standards using their hexagons or triangles or whatever, because they're more used to understanding it that way. And so it is possible. This is coming, but it's very new for a lot of local and small cities. There also is, because it's so new, a lot of cities are scared of the liability. They're rather them putting in something new and somebody hitting it or not liking it. They're scared of that, but that's kind of the point. The point is that we're telling people that, hey, if you don't like it, we'll take it out and we'll put something different. And I think that's just something that needs to be communicated. And I think the last point is that a lot of cities are just scared to talk into their own community, and we need to stop being scared.
Well, on that last point, it occurs to me that so many public sessions about a particular transportation issue involves sketches and drawings and slides, just like you pointed out at the beginning of your presentation, is nowhere near as effective as video or going out and touching and feeling the change. Can you talk about how both your new technology through social media and old technology through changing things on the ground has been utilized to engage folks in the process in a way that they often do not, particularly BIPOC communities and lower income communities?
Yes. So many times when I've had my slides and my community meetings where we're bringing in folks in the BIPOC community or in different language barriers, I'm spending a lot of time just explaining what we're trying to do or even where we are. Even like sometimes they'll be staring at the plan and they'll be like, so where's the big oak tree? And I'm like, oh, the oak tree's over here. It's like, okay, I walk this way past the oak tree, so I'm going to walk this way. I'm like, yeah, that's where we're at. And so there's a level of there's a barrier of just understanding engineering plans from an aerial or plan view, and also just explaining like what we're doing. I remember once I was speaking in a public meeting and I used the word rubberized asphalt, and the Vietnamese translator looked at me like, what are you saying? You know, so,
I'm sure our ASL interpreter finds many of these technical terms quite challenging too.
Yes. And so, but what's not as challenging is seeing a video or seeing a short form video over and over again. That crosses language barriers because somebody can see and feel what they're going to walk by and what they're going to look at, whether it has art or it's just bright. And we've seen a lot of communities feeling a lot more engaged when they're coming out there and their kids are coming out there and putting the glue down with the posts. And like I said earlier, with when the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to do a lot of those kind of walkthroughs, and so we have to go to online. We have a history in our industry of creating 3D models and 3D renderings and big, large actual physical models in architecture to kind of communicate that. But you still have to bring people to that meeting, or you got to get people to have access to that website. But using social media, people are already scrolling, you know, and so this is a great way to just get to where people are already spending their time.
Well, we got a ton of questions about just getting some of these approaches approved. We know that federal highways and through their becoming more famous document, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, but not just at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, some of what you're doing is not, you know, quote, standard. It's not, doesn't allow a plug and play of an old traditional model. How do you deal with that and encourage communities that may never have tried some of these designs before to try it? And how do you overcome any resistance at the federal and state level as well?
Yes. So I've learned to talk to everybody very, very different. So when I talk to my engineers, I talk to them about the materials, the maintenance, the reflectivity, what standards we're following, what standards we're bending, how we're interpreting different standards. MUTCD, for instance, regarding a protected bike lane, says the bike lane needs to go dashed at the intersection approach. But it also says that a double wide line defines an edge of travel way. And so me putting a double wide line, I'm effectively tightening the edge of travel way, similar to how you would do it through temporary traffic control. And so effectively the bike way is not even in the travel way because it's on the other side of this double wide line or the edge of travel way. And so reading into the rules and communicating to the engineers how we're interpreting the rules and showing them that we're still compliant, we're just interpreting it differently is how I've been able to have a lot of success. And when I talk to my fire department, I talk about it very differently about what they're going to run over. When I talk to the businesses, I talk about garbage pickup very differently. When I talk to public works, I talk about drainage and maintenance very differently. When I talk to DOT, I talk about signal timing very, very differently. And so talking about this stuff as a roadway improvement project, not necessarily a protected intersection or bikeway project or active transportation project, is really, really key to really get these projects approved. I also mentioned a lot of times engineers are just so used to seeing stuff their certain way. So sometimes you have to level with them even in CAD. So for instance, when I work with the city of San Jose, they renamed all of the standard detail line types from Caltrans. Instead of using 1 through 50, they chose the 20 that they like to use and renamed them 1 through 20. And so when I prepared my engineering details for them, I renumbered it to their specific standards to not add anything that's going to cause confusion, because their engineers spent 40 years being trained on those different line types, and that's what they're used to. And they reject something just because it's confusing and it's change. And so trying to make it as normal and as in sync with their stuff as possible. And just having good documentation of memos and more is important. Caltrans is being very flexible with a lot of this type of work. So when we work on Caltrans right away, they've already want to do more protected bike lanes and protected intersections. They just don't know what they're going to look like yet. So they're not able to tell us what the standards are, but they would like to see them. And so we go through the encroachment process where we're explaining what rules we're going against. Caltrans has mandatory and advisory rules, and we explain what we're doing against how we're adjusting those rules in their format, and that has helped a lot. So just getting on the same level as whoever you're talking to.
When you do these projects, is it standard to do before and after studies? And if so, what are you looking for in terms of performance? And are you thinking, not just about the results, but again, how to communicate them to non-technical people about how it will improve their lives?
So as a consultant, this only happens sometimes. So sometimes we get hired to do before and after studies. A lot of times we don't get hired to do that kind of stuff. The city says they're going to do it in-house. To be honest, going back to how we get it approved, a lot of these projects aren't capital improvement projects. We're secretly doing them as part of maintenance projects. So we're secretly just paving the street and adding paint and posts while we're paving the street. And so we're not actually triggering major drainage improvements and not actually triggering capital improvements, environmental CEQA review. We're just paving the street and then putting in paint and posts. And so that's how we're able to implement a lot of these kind of projects very, very quickly. For instance, in San Jose, this 16 miles of roadway was going to cost $32 million of paving and curb ramps, with an additional $1.2 million of paint and posts to implement this network. So the city was already going to spend $32 million anyway. This 1.2 million of paint and posts is just a little bit of addition, and that's how we're able to kind of skate by some of the things that would happen in typical capital improvement projects. And so that's how Quick Build is a great tool for cities to use as they do paving projects. I'd also add that the downtown network wasn't actually a master plan project. It just was some of the roads were on the bike master plan, but most of those roads are being paved. And as we looked at it again and we re-looked at the bike master plan, it just made sense for us to implement bike improvements on all those roadways. So sometimes even the plans can be outdated from where we're at right now.
And a question that we got a couple of times has to do with the impact of these sorts of projects on lower income communities and communities of color. There can be a very real fear of these improvements creating some property value increases and some pressures on locals. You might also hear a fear that the improvement is not for the local people. They don't feel like they will be the beneficiaries. And I'm wondering how, through your engagement, you address some of those issues as well.
Yes, this is a big issue of our time, is that we have a lot of low income BIPOC communities that have been begging for better infrastructure, just street lighting, just paved streets, just curb ramps for 50, 60 years. And they have not had any success of just getting a street light or a few crosswalks implemented in their town. But suddenly in the last 4 or 5 years, they're seeing a lot of crosswalks and curb ramps and bike lane improvements being implemented now, kind of curtailing to the newer folks. And that's why we talk about this word gentrification. And that's because the city seems to be curtailing and planning for newer people now, suddenly, while ignoring the issues of the community for 40, 50 years. And that's a situation I walk into a lot. And I have to be very humble in those situations, because a lot of times the community knows very well what they need. And what we do with these projects is I talk to them about it not being just a bike project. I talk about it being about all the other improvements to parking, to accessibility, to crosswalks, to maybe amenities, artwork, try to highlight different cultural art or languages through our work. You have to imagine, if you're in a community that has been begging for stuff for a long time, suddenly new stuff comes in and they erase a lot of your history, you're going to feel like you're being pushed out. So using different languages such as Spanish, Vietnamese, or different art in the street Painting in the street helps people feel that their history and their culture is going to last and going to be a part of this new project, or be part of what the next generation of that community and infrastructure is. And what I've seen a lot is just making sure that they're involved. But what was really important is making sure that they're involved throughout the whole process through language and outreach.
Yeah, I so appreciate that notion. Being a part of the development of a project makes that project more yours and not something done to you. So I think that is so important. I also know that when I was first brought into transportation, I was, I'm a very educated person and I learned quickly. However, I was flooded by words and terms and very technical concepts that made no sense to me. And sometimes the more time you spend in this field, the harder it is to see those terms and how hard they are for anybody outside of the inner circle to understand. I feel that what you're doing, both through those demonstration projects and through TikTok, is translating what we're trying to do with what people really want. And just remembering that all of us in transportation need to be those translators to real people so that they can understand how the system impacts them, so that they can be greater participants. I can't thank you enough for being here. I agree with the folks in the chat who say we should follow up with all the unanswered questions because there were so many. Maybe I can send them to you and they can be part of your feed and you can continue to answer them there. But I just want to thank you again so much for all of your work and your participation here today.
And thank you so much, Beth, for having me, and thank you all. And this is it's great to be able to even have this conversation with professionals. So.
Well, we cannot tell you how much we appreciate you enough. I, at this point, am excited to bring in the next part of the program, which is going to be led by Dr. Regan Patterson, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Dr. Patterson is the Transportation Equity Research Fellow at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, where she conducts intersectional transportation policy analysis and research. If you haven't read her reports, I strongly encourage you to go do so. Prior to joining the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, Dr. Patterson was